Hey guys, it's Sam from Gemini, and today we're going to be talking about abusive instructors and abusive practices in martial arts. Booyah! Now, I've spoken about this before in live streams, and I have touched on this in previous videos to a minor degree. I've not really gone into too much detail about it, but abuse in martial arts is something which does happen, sadly. But I'd like to kind of address what is abuse, the different kinds of abuse, and what sort of behaviours you can expect to see in abusive martial arts relationships. So, with that being said, let's start with what abuse is. Abuse is anything which is designed or intended to make someone feel shame, humiliation, harm, pain, frustration, embarrassment, any sort of negative emotion. So it's any action which is intending to cause another person distress, essentially, is abuse in its most simplified form. Abuse can be unintentional as well. However, I feel what is quite important to note is that we're talking about abuse with intent. So a lot of abuse can occur via accident or mistake. Somebody's not had the correct training. Somebody may be required to do a job they don't have the proper confidence to do, or they haven't been supervised to do it, and an accident happens. That could be abuse, but there was no intention to cause harm or distress. We're talking about somebody who's causing distress with the intent. So they are aware of what they're doing, they have the mental capacity to understand that what they're doing is abusive practice, and they're going to go ahead and do it anyway, with the aim of causing an individual distress or discomfort or pain or humiliation, or what we mentioned earlier. So that is abuse. Okay, so that being said, now let's go on to different types of abuse. Now, I feel this is interesting for martial arts because when you say abuse, a lot of people automatically associate abuse with something physical abuse, punching, hitting, slapping, kicking, spitting, that kind of stuff. Yet, that forms a small part of abuse, but when I worked in health and social care, we did safeguarding training, and it was a regular thing to stay on board of safeguarding training. And what I learned from that was that abuse is not just physical. You get psychological abuse, you get emotional abuse, you get financial, you get, now in this day and age, sadly, you get radicalization and extremism. All of these are forms of abuse. Institutional abuse. The list is almost quite indefinite, and the behaviours people exhibit whilst committing abuse can be very straightforward and obvious. Like if you just punch somebody in the face, that's a clear indication of abuse, and anybody who witnesses that will probably agree that that is abuse. However, a lot of other types of abuse, especially if you get into stuff like financial or most definitely emotional and psychological, it's harder to detect because they don't leave marks. You may see a change in somebody's behavior, but you have to understand that and know that person quite well to know what kind of behaviors you're looking out for. So this is interesting for martial arts because I've trained with many instructors down the line, and there was one instructor in particular who was quite tough on his students. And whereas I personally wouldn't have said that what he was doing was abusive practice, I could understand an outsider looking in and seeing what he was getting his students to do could have been misinterpreted as being abusive practice. It was very physical, a lot of physical conditioning. A lot of students were quite young, so a lot of people say, well, actually you're teaching kids, or you're doing these kind of activities to kids. Couldn't that be seen as being quite abusive? And a lot of martial arts instructors who do physical abuse from their students often disguise and hide it, I've seen over the years, by saying stuff like, I'm trying to toughen them up. Oh, we've got a competition coming up. Do you think his opponent's going to go soft on him? No, that's why I'm being hard now. And there was a quote I saw years ago. It said, the more we sweat in training, the less we bleed in battle. And I looked at that and thought, well, that on the surface sounds quite cool, but when you really delve into it, and I don't hope I'm overanalyzing this, but to me that almost sounds like an excuse for a sadistic-minded instructor to abuse their student. Because essentially they'll put them through hell out of a abusive practice, intent to cause distress, and pretend it's all part of training. And a classic example of that in pop culture will be seen in Karate Kid 3. Terry Silver is pretty much abusing Danny LaRusso, and he's got this pretense of, I'm training you up to be strong, when really he was just doing it. Terry Silver was doing all that practice purely because he was sadistic. He just wanted to abuse Danny LaRusso. So physical abuse in martial arts, it can be easily disguised, and I've seen it being easily disguised. Abuse which I received myself, and as I said at the beginning of the video, I have talked in live streams briefly about my abuse I received when I was a student doing martial arts as a youngster, was largely, for the most part, emotional and psychological, to the point where I wasn't even aware that I was being abused. I just saw this practice as the modus operandi. I thought this is what all martial arts schools did. I didn't see what my instructor was doing at the time as being abusive. And if I dared question this abusive practice, I was made to feel as though I was in the wrong for questioning it. Additionally, as well as that, I felt myself develop Stockholm syndrome towards my abuser. I found myself trying to justify his abuse and somehow blaming myself for when this abuse happened. So I'm bringing a bit of personal experience into this as well. And I'm not one to try and say, look, this is a woe is me, poor me, I've been abused type of thing. But it was only in recent years I actually then looked back in retrospect to the abuse I received in my martial arts training and said to myself, actually, now that I acknowledge that I was abused psychologically and emotionally, I can now start to recover. And I can now look at my past in a very different light, and I can make sense of what happened to me. And a lot of what happened to me then kind of impacted how I behaved, which is quite a combination of a psychodynamic and a CBT approach. Psychodynamic being that what happened to me in my childhood affected me in my adulthood, but CBT as well, because I was then being able to address negative thought patterns which I had and say, actually, this isn't necessarily you thinking this is the result of your abuse. So yeah, stuff that I experienced, and I'm lucky to the degree that I feel as though I was able to now look back and recognize that I had been abused, but not be in denial about it. It was painful to accept, it was painful to admit, but I feel that once I did admit it, there was a sharp jab of pain, but then once I got through that, it was actually now looking at myself thinking, yes, now I can get on my personal road to recovery. I can't change what happened to me, but that's not going to affect how I treat people in the future. That's not going to affect how I live my life in the future. And as a matter of fact, it makes me now more clued up now to recognize that abuse again if I see it happen. So abusive behaviors to look out for. I mean, again, going from my experience, it was very narcissistic abuse. I was rarely, if ever, given praise. And this is stuff that other people hopefully could look out. When I say hopefully, I'm not saying hopefully you get abused. What I mean by that is, if you go to train at a school and hopefully you can see these signs that I'm about to tell you, for you to be able to say, actually, yeah, and I can now see that is abusive practice. So once for myself, I was hardly ever praised. I received actually more critique than I did encouragement and praise. At various levels, at competition, in training itself. So yeah, an over disciplinarian approach. Constant pressure, constantly being pressurized to do competitions, even when I loved competitions back in the day, but I remember a few occasions I was like, you know what, I want to miss this one out. I don't want to do this competition for whatever reason. Just wasn't into it, had other things going on, just wanted to miss this one out. And the pressure I received then of, no, you have to do competitions, and if you don't, you're letting the team down. It was always on me. Nobody else seemed to get this treatment. It was always on me. Having your contributions overlooked and ignored, that's something I experienced, and I feel that is very emotional. It's emotionally manipulating and abusive. you could contribute so much to a martial arts school in various different ways, and to actually at the end of the day have an abusive instructor turn around and say, actually, your contributions never mattered. You were never our student anyway. We're not your, don't say that we're your teachers. All this kind of stuff. It's like, you know, how dare you actually? I bent over backwards to make this team work, and you to say that, one, it's untrue. Two, it's heart-wrenching, basically. Another interesting kind of abuse as well, actually, is kind of like the ganging up bully kind of techniques. Having like instructors going off and getting people in their wider martial arts circle to then look at you as the bad guy when they're the ones actually who've kind of, well, I wouldn't say made you the way you are, but they've certainly given you a rough ride. They've bred quite maybe a bit of resentment inside of you. And when that resentment comes out, or you you suddenly stand your ground and say, no, I don't want to get involved with this anymore, suddenly they gang up and all their friends and associations, and they want to exclude you from these certain groups just because you have the courage to stand up for yourself. I feel as well, in this day and age, this modern day and age of the internet as well, bullying has taken on new strains, whereas I remember when I was a kid at school, bullying was basically just like in the playground. But in the 21st century, we have the internet, and I feel a lot of bullying now is cyber, because people feel as though they've got some protection. They feel that they can post anonymously and get away with it, which isn't the case. But then you get people on the internet then saying certain things about you, posting certain things on Facebook, making YouTube videos about you, and spreading half-truths and lies, out-and-out lies, all with that intent to cause you distress. So those, like I said, the type of abuse is extensive, but just from my experience, I was hoping to kind of then highlight some of the experience I had from the abuse I received and put that out there for anybody who wants to start a new martial art, or you're a youngster, you want to go to your first school, and you're going to get wooed over by the instructor. You may do get wooed over by the instructor, but just little things to look out for. Just this kind of stuff, like constant criticism, hardly any praise, pressurized to support the team and do competitions when that pressure's not put on to anybody else, neglecting your contributions, getting everybody to gang up on you basically, and then like posting malicious stuff about you online. And that's not even getting into the physical kind of stuff either. As an adult, if you went to a martial arts lesson and some bully instructor tried like physically abusing you, maybe as an adult you might have the mental capacity to look at this and think this isn't right. But as a child, and you're constantly drilled in martial arts to never question your instructor, I certainly remember being reprimanded a few times because I didn't agree with the instructor's ways during the lesson, and he wanted to basically bring me back into line. And me being a very inquisitive guy, I'm very much a think outside of the box type of person. I don't like to follow paradigms or dogmas. I like to explore and experiment. For me, that didn't go down too well. To be told, just shut up and just do what I say kind of thing. I don't take well to that kind of instruction, personally. But these are just things to kind of look out for. Like I said, if you're new and you see these kind of flags, they are going to be big red flags. And my advice to you would be to actually withdraw yourself, either find a new school, or if you've decided actually that's martial arts kind of done and dusted for you because you had such a negative experience, you can always find a new activity. There's hundreds of activities out there, and martial arts isn't the be-all end-all of life, trust me. Anyway, guys, hope this has been insightful. Brief, but insightful, I hope. Stay safe, train hard, keep listening to Slaughter, because they're the best band around, and I'll see you all guys in the next video. Booyah!